4 years, 3 months, and 11 days. I know the exact count because I figured it out once, around the second anniversary, when I was standing in my garage trying to decide whether to finally take down the batting cage in the backyard. I built it when my son was 12. I ended up leaving it there. Some things you just can't bring yourself to dismantle. Then my phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon in October. I was sitting on the back porch with coffee and the Wall Street Journal. The same routine I'd settled into since selling my firm 8 months earlier. 32 years I ran Hargrove Structural Engineering. 41 employees at the peak. Projects from the Research Triangle all the way to Phoenix. And then I sold it, quietly for more than anyone expected, and retired to a house in Cary, North Carolina, with a porch and a yard and a batting cage I couldn't take down. I looked at the screen. The number was familiar the way a scar is familiar. You stop noticing it every day, but the second you look directly at it, you remember exactly how it got there. I answered on the fourth ring. "Dad," he said it the way you'd say the name of a city you used to live in, flat, distant, not unkind exactly, just uninvested. "I saw that you sold the firm, congratulations." 4 years, not even a text on my birthday, and that was the opening congratulations. I said thank you and waited. "I need to tell you about something I've been building," he said. "I think you're going to be impressed. I'm hosting an investor summit next Friday at the Marriott Crabtree. I'd really like you to be there." Then he told me the number, $100,000, wired by end of business the following Monday if I wanted in on the ground floor. I sat there on that porch in the October afternoon with the newspaper folded in my lap, and I let the silence run long enough that I heard him shift in his chair somewhere on the other end of the line. "You still there?" he said. "I'm here," I said. I told him I'd think about it. He said that was great, that he'd send the event details, that this was going to change both our lives. He talked the way a man talks when he's been coached on exactly what to say, everything measured, everything at the right volume. At the very end, almost as an afterthought, he said it would be good to see me. After I hung up, I sat there until the coffee went completely cold. The afternoon light moved across the yard and caught the batting cage just right, the way it used to on summer evenings when my son was in Little League, and I'd throw him 100 pitches after dinner every night, all summer, until my shoulder ached and we were both too tired to talk. Those were some of the quietest, best hours of my life. Welcome to Dad's Bold Revenge. Get comfortable. This story is going to take you somewhere real. Hit that like button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to stay for all of it. I need to back up a little, because nothing that happened started that Wednesday afternoon. My son was 25 when the silence began. He had a business idea, a platform connecting independent contractors with commercial clients. I thought the concept had genuine merit, but I had also run a business for 32 years, and I know the distance between a good idea and a viable company. The numbers didn't work, the market was crowded, he had no operational experience, no runway savings, no partner with any industry knowledge. He needed $65,000, and he wanted me to co-sign a business loan to get it. I said no. I offered to help him build a real business plan. I offered introductions to people in my professional network who could mentor him. I sat down with him 3 separate times and tried to work through what a realistic path looked like. He didn't want any of it. He wanted the signature. His mother, my ex-wife Brenda, 9 years divorced, civil enough on the surface, but oil and water underneath, told him I was controlling, that I'd never believed in him, that I was threatened by his ambition. I know this because my son quoted her back to me, nearly word for word, in the argument that ended everything. She had been rewriting the story of our marriage for years, and somewhere in the process she had rewritten the story of who I was. I stopped being his father and became the obstacle. He slammed out of my house on a cold November afternoon. I heard his car back out of the driveway too fast. I went inside and sat at my kitchen table until well past midnight, telling myself it was temporary, that he'd cool down, that we'd find our way back to each other. I waited. He didn't come back. So when that phone call arrived 4+ years later, some part of me, the part that never really stopped being his father regardless of what the calendar said, wanted to believe the summit was just a pretext, that he was reaching out because he missed me, that the $100,000 was secondary and the conversation was the actual point. I knew better, but knowing better and feeling better are entirely different things. That evening I opened my laptop and looked up the company name he'd mentioned, Apex Yield Clean website, professional design, a photograph of my son shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize at what appeared to be a conference event. Investor testimonials, first names only, no last names, no verifiable profiles anywhere. The other man in the photograph was his business partner, His name was Lance Brewer. I put that name into a search engine and gave myself until midnight. By 11 o'clock, I had enough to feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Lance Brewer had a civil judgment against him in Mecklenburg County from 2021. A former business partner had sued him for $43,000 in misappropriated operating funds. Settled out of court, terms undisclosed. I found a second complaint. Not a lawsuit, but a formal grievance filed with the North Carolina Secretary of State's office from an investor group alleging that a yield optimization fund Lance had operated in 2022 had failed to return principal after the promised 18-month term. The complaint had been filed. I couldn't find a resolution anywhere. I pulled up the Secretary of State's business registrations for Apex Yield Partners. The registered agent was a law firm I'd never heard of. The listed principal office address was a WeWork location in South Charlotte, a shared workspace rented by the hour. I closed the laptop and stood at my kitchen counter at 11:15 at night, and I thought about 32 years of structural engineering. The first thing they teach you in this field is that the failure you cannot see is the one that kills you. A building doesn't collapse because someone looked at it and decided it was unsafe. It fails because someone decided it looked solid enough from the outside and stopped asking questions. I kept asking questions for the next 2 days. By Thursday, I had found 3 more investor complaints against Lance Brewer across 2 states, Georgia and Virginia, all following the same pattern: a high-yield investment vehicle, a polished prospectus, returns that looked almost legitimate for the first few months, then a series of explanations about market conditions and liquidity challenges, followed by silence. In one Virginia case, a retired couple had lost what they described in the legal filing as the majority of our retirement savings. I found a brief mention buried in a Charlotte Business Journal article from 14 months prior. 2 sentences noting that the SEC's Southeast Regional Office had opened a preliminary inquiry into an unnamed Charlotte area investment firm specializing in alternative yield products. The timing matched the profile of Apex Yield Partners exactly. I printed everything, 43 pages. I put them in a manila folder, the same kind I'd used for project documentation for 3 decades. I sat at my kitchen table Friday morning and looked at that folder for a long time. I could have called him with the information. I could have emailed it. I could have called a lawyer or filed a tip with the SEC and let the professionals handle it from there. Part of me thought that was the right move, but a bigger part of me, the part that had thrown 1,000 pitches in that backyard, that had driven him to practice and stayed in the hospital parking lot all night when he had emergency appendix surgery at 16, not wanting to leave until I knew he was all right, that part needed to look him in the eye. I needed to give him the chance to make a different choice before it was too late to make one. So I RSVP'd to the Investor Summit. The Friday of the event was gray and cool, one of those October days in the South where the sky can't quite decide whether to rain. I wore a charcoal sport coat, the one I'd had for 15 years, the one that, according to my former office manager, made me look like I was going to a school board meeting. I didn't care. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to see my son. The Marriott Crabtree Valley is a respectable hotel. Conference spaces, a big atrium, the kind of place that hosts pharmaceutical training events and regional insurance conventions. I'd been there twice in my life, both for industry dinners. It felt strange to walk in under these circumstances. I found the event room easily. Apex Yield Partners had a banner at the entrance, professionally printed, royal blue and gold. Maybe 40 people inside when I arrived, drinks in hand, the low-stakes networking hum that fills any investment event. Flat screens along the walls showed yield curves and projected returns, the visual language of legitimacy arranged in slides. I saw my son before he saw me. He was across the room talking to a couple who looked to be in their mid-50s. He was animated, smiling, leaning slightly forward the way he always did when he was excited about something. He looked good. He looked like a man who had built something he believed in. For a few seconds, I just watched him. He had his grandfather's jaw, my own father's jaw. I hadn't noticed that in years, because I hadn't seen him in years. He still pushed his hand through his hair when he was making a point. He'd done that since he was 8 years old. Then Lance Brewer appeared at my elbow. He was younger than I expected, maybe 35, fit with a smile that worked very hard to reach his eyes, already extending his hand before I'd turned fully toward him. "You must be Ethan's dad," he said. "He's mentioned you. Built your own firm from the ground up. That's genuinely impressive. Those are exactly the kind of investors we love having at the table. People who understand what real work looks like." I shook his hand. The grip was calibrated. Not too firm, not too soft. Everything about Lance Brewer was calibrated. My son spotted me about 10 minutes later. He crossed the room and we shook hands. Not a hug, just a handshake. And he said it was good I came and that tonight was going to be something. His eyes were bright in the way that can mean genuine excitement or managed anxiety, and I wasn't sure which one I was looking at. Can we find 5 minutes alone? I said quietly. Before the presentation, there's something I need to show you. He glanced toward Lance, who was already moving toward us across the room, with the practiced ease of a man who monitors every conversation he isn't part of. We can talk after, my son said. Everything's laid out in the presentation. Just keep an open mind. Ethan, I used his name the way I only use it when I need him to actually hear me. He had known that tone since he was 14. 5 minutes, just us, please. Something moved behind his eyes. Then Lance arrived with 2 glasses of sparkling water and a smile that foreclosed the conversation entirely. The presentation was slick. I'll give Lance that. He had built something that looked exactly like a real thing. Projected IRR of 22% annually. A proprietary algorithmic trading system, described in language that sounds sophisticated to anyone who doesn't know what it means. Testimonials from early investors, a slide with regulatory compliance disclosures in a font small enough that no one in a room like that would stop to read it in real time. I sat in the 4th row and watched my son stand at the edge of the stage while Lance worked the room. My son looked proud. He also looked like a man standing on a glass floor, watching the cracks spread below him and choosing not to look down. When the formal presentation ended, I found my son near the back corner of the room. I need you to look at something, I said. I held out the folder. He took it slowly. He didn't open it. Ethan. Dad? Open it, I said. You don't have to do anything with it tonight. Just read it. He glanced toward Lance again. Lance was across the room with a couple who had produced their checkbooks. Not metaphorically, their actual checkbooks. Lance has a civil judgment against him in Mecklenburg County, I said, keeping my voice low, and an investor complaint with the Secretary of State, and at least 3 more complaints in Georgia and Virginia. The SEC opened a preliminary inquiry 14 months ago that matches the profile of this fund exactly. My son's expression didn't change immediately. It moved through something slow and complicated, a layered thing that faces do when processing information they don't want to be true. You're doing this again, he said. Doing what? Finding reasons? Making it about control. His voice dropped, but the edge was sharp. I have investors in this room tonight who believe in what we're building. I have a partner who's worked harder than you've ever. I know about the Fairfax County couple in Virginia, I said. The retired teacher and her husband who filed a complaint after losing $87,000 in a fund he ran in 2022. I know about the WeWork address listed as your principal office. I know about the registered agent firm that shows up in 11 other shell company filings in this state. He was quiet. His jaw had set in a way that looked so much like my own face that it almost undid me completely. I'm not asking for anything from you, I said. I'm not here to run your life. I am telling you, your father telling you, that what's in this folder is real, and you need to read it before anyone in this room sends a wire. He looked down at the folder in his hands. Then he held it back out to me. I think you should go, he said. I stood there. I had another 30 seconds of things I could have said, but I have been in enough rooms over 63 years to know when a door is closed, and I know what it costs a person to keep knocking after it is. I took the folder. I set it on the table beside us, right between a stack of Apex Yield Partners brochures and a tray of untouched shrimp cocktail. I squared it to the edge of the table. Everything you need is in there, I said. I love you. I'm going home. I walked through the room, past the screen showing yield curves, past the couple with the checkbooks, past the banner at the entrance. I did not stop. I did not look back. The drive home took 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire way. The same way you watch a clock in a waiting room, when you need something to look at besides what you're thinking. The weekend was quiet. I cut the grass Saturday morning even though it didn't need it. I went to church Sunday. I prayed for my son, which is a thing I had done every Sunday for 4 years without anything visible to show for it, except the habit itself. I got home both days to an empty house and the kind of silence that gets heavier the longer you know it. Monday morning, my phone rang at 7:48. I was on my second cup of coffee. I looked at the screen. They arrested him? My son's voice was something I'd never heard from him before. Not anger, not grief exactly. Compressed. Like a man reciting a dream he can't believe was real. Last night, at the event, FBI. 2 agents walked in during the cocktail hour with a warrant and took him out in handcuffs in front of everybody. I sat down. There's more, he said. They froze the fund's operating accounts. All the investor money. It's frozen pending investigation, Dad. His voice cracked on that word, just slightly, just enough. Those people who were there Friday, some of them had already sent wires over the weekend. One of them was a retired schoolteacher, 68 years old. She came up to me after the presentation and told me she was putting in $40,000 because she trusted us. I stayed quiet with that for a moment. Where are you right now? I asked. Parking lot of a Panera off Wake Forest Road, he said. I've been here since 6. I didn't know where else to go. I thought about a retired teacher writing a $40,000 check. I thought about 43 pages in a manila folder, sitting on a table between the brochures and the shrimp cocktail. Come here, I said. Coffee will be ready. He arrived 38 minutes later. He looked like he'd slept in his car, which I later found out was exactly what he'd done. He came in and sat at my kitchen table, the same chair he'd occupied for every significant conversation of his childhood, and I poured him a cup and sat across from him and waited. He talked for a long time. About Lance, about how they'd met at a Charlotte networking event 2 years ago, about how legitimate everything had appeared, about the early returns that had actually materialized and made him believe he'd finally found the real thing, about the constant pressure to bring in bigger investors, always more urgency, always a larger check, about the things that had felt slightly wrong along the way that he'd told himself were just how the finance world operated. I listened. I did not say I told you so, not because I'm a particularly patient man, but because those 4 words have never once helped anyone, and I knew that better than most. When he ran out of words, the kitchen went quiet. October light through the window over the sink. I need to ask you something, he said finally. He was looking at his coffee cup, turning it slowly with both hands. That folder. You printed all of that before the event. Yes. You drove down there knowing. I drove down there, I said, because you're my son, and because I needed to give you the chance to make a different choice before it wasn't a choice anymore. That's all. He turned the cup again. It was a habit he'd had since he was a kid, turning baseball cards in his hands, studying them like they held information he hadn't located yet. I should have taken the folder, he said. Yes, I said, you should have. There's no point softening a thing like that. He needed to hear it plainly. He was going to need to hear a lot of things plainly over the coming months. What do I do now? He asked. I'd been thinking about this since before the phone rang, because this was the actual question, not what happens to Lance, not what the SEC does with the frozen accounts, not how the investors recover their losses. Those processes were already larger than either of us. The actual question was what a 29-year-old man does when the thing he spent 2 years building turns out to have been constructed entirely on someone else's lie. You cooperate with the investigation, I said, fully and immediately. You retain an attorney today, not this week, today. You document everything you know about how the fund operated, every communication, every decision. If there's any possibility of recovering anything for those investors, your full cooperation is what creates that possibility. I paused. And then you rebuild. He looked up. Not the company, I said. Yourself. You spend real time learning what you don't know, accounting, actual market mechanics, how real businesses fail and recover. You work for someone else for a while and you let yourself be the one who doesn't have all the answers. You let someone else be right about things so you can learn how right looks different from how you've been picturing it. And when you're ready to build something again, genuinely ready, you call me. We'll sit right here at this table and we'll go through the numbers together. He was quiet for a moment. You'd still do that, he said. It wasn't quite a question. You're my son, I said. I'll always do that. But I will not fund a shortcut, and I won't help you build something that looks real before it is real. You need to understand that those are 2 different things, and why they're different. He nodded. It was slow, but it was real. I'm sorry, he said, for the 4 years, for Friday night, for not taking the folder. I know, I said. I should have called a long time ago, he said. Not because of any money, just I should have called. I know that too, I said. We sat a while longer. I refilled both cups. After some point, the conversation shifted, not to anything heavy, just small things, the kind of talking that doesn't mean much on its surface, but means everything when the last time you talked it ended with a slammed door. He asked about the firm's sale, how the process had gone. I asked what he thought of Charlotte compared to when he'd first moved there. It was the kind of conversation 2 people have when they've gotten through the hard part and don't quite know what comes next, but they're both still in the room. He left around noon. We shook hands at the door, and then I pulled him in for a brief hug, the stiff, half-awkward kind that men have when they're relearning a language they let go rusty. He'd been about 4 inches shorter the last time I'd done that. I stood on the porch and watched him drive down the street. Then I went back inside, picked up my coffee, cold, but I drank it anyway, and sat at the kitchen table in the October quiet. There was no moment of triumph. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to frame this as a story where the father is proven right and the son comes crawling back and justice lands clean and on schedule. That's not what happened. There's no version of watching your son sit at your table and recount how badly things have gone wrong that feels like winning anything. What I felt was tired, wrung out in a way that sleep doesn't fix. And underneath that, something smaller and more durable, a feeling I had almost forgotten how to locate after 4 years of not being able to find it at all. The door was open again. Not all the way, not yet. There was real work ahead, the kind that can't be rushed or shortcut, the kind that takes years and requires both of you to show up. But it was open, and we were on the same side of it for the first time in a long time. After a while, I went out back. The yard was a little overgrown. The October sky had finally made up its mind, and the light was doing that late afternoon thing it does in fall, flat and golden, the kind that makes ordinary things look like they mean something. The batting cage was still there, rusty along the frame, the netting loose in one corner, 16 years of weather on it, every bit. I stood there looking at it for a minute. Then I went inside to find the number for a fencing contractor. If we were going to start over, we might as well start with something real. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe to Dad's Bold Revenge. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next one.